Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I like the evolution of the main overarching case this episode. Obviously, it goes from, Marcus is trying to help out, someone he knows, Davis, but it's like he's taking a sniper rifle, and it's like, okay, so what's this all about? Well, then it turns out, obviously he was across the street from, a hotel with a sniper rifle, and it's like, okay, because it turns out he's into a lot more. Obviously he was editing stuff, owed money. Well, basically he was helping produce bondage porn, but also not only producing it, he was actually starring in it. Well, it turns out he was actually getting blackmailed by someone because he wasn't meant to kill anyone. He was just supposed to fire a shot at a particular hotel room that someone was staying in, just enough to spook them. And it turns out that circumstances, just knowing that someone was there, made the security firm that was looking after him get spooked, and he ended up, the person in particular, his name is Baron, he's a boxer, ended up getting killed along with some of the guards that were guarding him. And so it turns to this whole thing of okay, so who did this? Was it the people that other boxers who didn't like him because they thought, oh, he was juicing or whatever, taking steroids and stuff? But then it's like, okay, maybe his doctor did it, because it turns out he actually was sick. He had this particular thing with his pancreas where it wouldn't, the enzymes was messed up, and so it made it harder for him to digest food. Well, it turns out that he doesn't necessarily have this particular thing. It's actually some kind of mutation that basically makes it so that he burns off fat and gains a lot of muscle and makes him super lean. It's like some superhero shit, to the point you're like, yeah, this is literally the physique that people would wish they had. This is a physique that doesn't even exist in comic books, and it's just some weird medical mutation that he has that allowed his body like this. The doctor wanted to take advantage of it. Turns out he didn't kill this guy because, as Sherlock had said, his golden goose and everything. And what I thought was kind of interesting, it's oh yeah, I broke into his house. I was going to replace the pills he was taking with sedatives so I can sneak in there and take his DNA however I want to, blood samples and stuff like that. It's man, that's hardcore. But at the same time, it's well, you understand why he did it, because it's oh, I'm gonna make a whole bunch of money being able to sell maybe a pill version of his mutation, and be oh man, make you burn a whole bunch of fat and get super muscular and lean and stuff. So you get it, but at the same time, it's still man, that's super shitty. You're supposed, doctors do no harm and everything. This is the one you're supposed to be taking care of, but it's oh, you're looking after the reputation you would have and the boatload of money you would make afterwards. But then the story develops because it's oh, maybe it's not just about that, because then it pops up about okay, his family. Well, it initially it's okay, so maybe he has other existing family out there who has the same condition, and basically photo albums and stuff were stolen, and some of his birth record stuff was stolen, so no one would ever connect his other family. So he's kind of one of a kind. Get what you need from Baron. He's dead, and then everyone else, lo and behold, no one will ever find the connection there, never be able to track them down. Well, and then to me, what's it just keeps building and building, because the next step, and what ultimately ends up being the whole situation behind it, is that basically the family he's originally from, the Bautistas, come from a situation where it's they were growing beans and stuff like that, coffee. I don't know if it was specifically coffee beans, but the plants they were growing, that beans were growing from, was going to be worth a lot of money. The lady Sherlock, who knows all about coffee beans and stuff like that, she was these will be worth $500 a pound. But sadly, the entire family ended up dying from an earthquake, so Baron would have been the sole heir to that situation, and that's what he got killed about. So it's oh, is there another heir? Technically there is, because the assistant for the doctor, she's pregnant. She had Baron's kid. And I was thinking I thought it was afterwards and she wanted to take advantage of it. It's no. The way they broke it down, it's she's known for a while. That was the whole reason why she got with Baron in the first place, was to make it so she can get his child, because she found out about where he was from. That's so messed up. You literally orchestrated all that, because obviously it's for greed on your personal sense, but it's you literally killed your baby's dad. That's super messed up, and it was for greed reasons too. Manipulate, your child isn't even born yet, and you're using them as a position to benefit from you killing that child's father. That's some super twisted shit. I wasn't expecting the storyline to kind of play out in that same regard. That was just And like I said, it's like red herring after red herring, which the cases are, but it's just like, that's always something interesting that Elementary does. It's never 100% what you initially think. There's always red herrings, there's always twists and turns, and I just love how this story built out, or it's just kind of like potentially other boxers hating him to doctors wanting his genetic makeup, which is like technically someone else wanting his genetic makeup purely not for the whole aspect of like, oh, the mutation he has, but more so for the fact is of being able to be like, oh, this child's an heir to this land and everything. So it's crazy. I mean, and it also kind of concisely compounds upon itself because, like I said, the whole DNA situation of like, oh, his DNA is for the mutation versus his DNA just needed to be, this child that was sired to be like, hey, the heir to this whole thing. Nevertheless, crazy. But, really quickly, I also want to point out one of my favorite aspects to it's like Joan drinking the coffee. It's like, oh my God, this is so good. And as it turns out, this particular bean is eaten by weasels and then regurgitated like multiple times or something. And then you have like Joan stopping for a second. She's like, honestly, I don't care that this is mixed with weasel vomit, because it's that good, and she keeps drinking. I love that. Okay, now that's one side of things. Then we kind of got our overarching story, because it's the whole conversation about Odin and everything that he does. Essentially, obviously he has a lot of access to a lot of people's personal data. Basically, for him, it's like, okay, so it's kind of a school shooting situation where he ends up finding out that the person in particular that was involved in it ended up posting a whole bunch of stuff on like his Odker's social media platforms. And so it's like we could have acted sooner if we had looked into it. And so that's what Odin's whole thing is. It's like we're pushing the whole system, like we're keeping an eye on people's privacy. We're using it. It's kind of like which obviously, it's war TV, obviously reflecting the real world, because that's obviously a big issue, like people's privacy and stuff like that. It's like you can understand the greater good applications of like, okay, we dive into people's stuff. It's like it's a whole conversation of like, oh yeah, people have nothing to hide, don't have to worry about it. That's not the question, because even if it is a thing of like you don't have anything to hide, that's still your privacy. It's still something that you should be entitled to. The fact of the matter is, because it starts off with an inch. You give someone an inch, they take a mile. So it might be the point of like, oh, it might seem like not the biggest deal now, but then eventually they start taking more and more of that private information, and then nothing about you becomes private. Like every little aspect of your life is out there for the world, which obviously that's, commentary on just like social media nowadays. I'm not trying to be trying to like make a point or something like that. It's like, no, it's an interesting parallel. That's what TVs do. Like they try to format stories that kind of reflect the modern day, and that's modern day in a nutshell, which, like I said, just from an interesting standpoint, not trying to say one way or another. It's just an interesting thing. Even my whole thought process on the whole privacy thing has changed. Like, because I can always see both sides of the argument, but I do lean more towards like, oh, I can understand why people are making such a huge push of being like, people, like, even if you don't have anything to hide, like you're not a terrible person, that's still kind of it's a whole thing. Like I said, I'm not trying to get all preachy or anything like that. It's a fascinating conversation when you break it down. But nevertheless, in Odin's case, it's just like, I'm trying to do good with this information. But then Sherlock is kind of like, yeah, but these people are entitled to their privacy, and you're, because the reason why you're not going to the police and stuff like that, because you would have to admit how you illegally got this information, even though these people are supposed to be given their privacy. You would literally lose everything, your company and everything, a whole bunch of money. Potentially you'd go to jail too. So that would be a whole issue in itself. But obviously Odin thinks he's in the right in this situation. Obviously, like, Sherlock wants to take him down because he doesn't believe in the way that Odin's planning to handle things, because it's like, oh, you take someone like Patrick Meir, you turned him into a killer. Yes, you stopped a bomber like Tim from killing a whole bunch of people, but the fact of the matter is you're turning everyday citizens into murderers to stop murder. It's not supposed to work like that. You can understand, like, from side point of being like, yeah, like, the good outweighs the evil, but at the same time, it's like two wrongs don't make a right type of situation, So once again, whole conversation in itself. So now they kind of want to take him down, but they can't go to the FBI because they're not on the best terms with the FBI and everything. It's too big for, the NYPD to deal with. So Sherlock turns to his other allies, the NSA, in particular McNally, which is interesting. Like, I'm jumping around here, but I appreciate, like, the fact is a very often recurring character we see pop up every once in a while. To see him kind of shift like we did, I thought that was kind of fascinating, but I'll get to that in a second. But I do like the fact that he's willing to help out Sherlock and everything. I even love the fact is that later on he's at Sherlock's place and he's like, oh yeah, there's a jar that was protein. He's like, these are bugs, aren't they? And it's like, yep. So it's like setting up the whole thing of like, okay, we're going to take down Odin, but we need you to kind of set up the meeting so you can have the conversations with them. And it's actually kind of interesting when you hear Sherlock's conversation with Odin, because Odin's like, yeah, these two particular incidents that he's kind of done in the past, like, yeah, they were surefire things of like, yeah, he saved a few lives by killing 2 murderers. So it's like, yeah, I can get behind that. I can understand that to a certain extent. Once again, 2 wrongs don't make it right. But then the example they gave was like the bus driver lady. Apparently she was saying some stuff on like her blog or whatever about the fact that she was just tired. She was going to drive like her bus with her and children off the road. So it's like, oh, she was going to endanger all those kids, so we had to put her down. But then Sherlock was like, if you look deeper, you'd realize her blog, she gets like this around her birthday. She gets a little depressed. Maybe I don't think they ever explain why, but I guess maybe it's just the whole thing of like, oh, getting older, your mortality kind of starts creeping in, and midlife crisis type of thing. Either way. But the next day after her birthday has passed, she goes back to normal, and like none of that kind of gets acted upon. It's like, and you as someone, statistics and stuff like Sherlock's like, Odin, like, what are the statistics that something would have actually happened? I think it was like 18% or something like that. And it's like, yeah, and you went through it and killed her anyway. But for him, it's like, why even take the chance? So it's like, because for him, he's trying to white knight it to the point like, because he's making up for the fact is, yeah, I could have stopped the tragedy before, I didn't, and it turns into that Minority Report situation. Because even the situation where Watson kind of brought up a good point at the beginning, being like, the fact of the matter is, a lot of people kind of say some shit they necessarily don't mean on the internet, because a lot of people just vent and they're angry. Obviously, the key thing is like, watch what the hell you say on the internet, because it's like, you might say something just out of anger, but it could be looked at a bad way of like, oh, you trying to do some shit, So once again, the parallels between TVs and mimicking, echoing real life events and stuff like that. So it's fascinating. But in the case of, because it's like, oh yeah, my mom writes, some stuff in her reviews and stuff like that, so it's like, should she be in trouble? So it's like that Minority Report thing of like, you say some stuff, doesn't necessarily, there's like a percentage that you would do something, but it's like, it's not 100% of a guarantee you killing someone for something that they might have done, but then you get in that situation of like, well, the fact of the matter is, I'm sure this is Odin's mind of like, well, would you rather have acted than not acted? And when you did act, something terrible happened, a tragedy happened. So that's the whole conversation. So Sherlock is like, okay, we'll work with you, but we're going to make it so that we heavily investigate things before you handle it. Because even, Odin was like, oh, I need a scalpel, because he wants Sherlock and Joan because the way they operate, because he's like, he's not trying to just yeah, what they did with the whole Patrick Muir situation and everything, him being a patriot and everything, but at the end of the day, it's like, yes, he stopped tragedies, but he became a murderer in the process, and he's like, he knows Sherlock and Joan won't be like that. I even do appreciate the fact is that Sherlock's like, oh no, I've thought about committing murder in the past too. Should I be held in that regard even though I've never committed it? Which we've been in that case where he has thought about it, like the whole M situation way back in the day. There was a situation back in season 4. His buddy, his meetings person. Which, side note, I didn't even think about that. Didn't even click in my head. That has not even been in. I guess because this season is shorter, they're not even dealing with like him going to meetings and stuff like that. Did he even do that when he was back in the UK? I mean, when he was back in London, I don't know if he did. Like, maybe that came up in conversation. I missed it. I completely forgot about it. To be fair, because last time we saw it was last season because it played a part and like that's how he met Michael and everything. But still, maybe it makes you wonder on some level, did that implement kind of ruin that for him, where he's kind of like more careful about where he goes and how much he actually talks about his work, or does he feel like he's in a, because it's a thing, it's like it's a continuous thing, so it's a part of his system. Like, it's just interesting because I just thought about it. It's like that's not a part of his storyline anymore. I mean, like I said, maybe it's just because they got less episodes, so they kind of had to cut corners in certain regards. I'm just thinking about it. It's like, yeah, that's not there at all. I didn't even think about that until just now. It's like, huh, because that's a big part of Sherlock's story. It's his addiction, So, nevertheless, but I went off on a huge tangent, so I do apologize. Nevertheless. But then the twist is we find out that McNally works with Odin, and I love Charlotte being like, oh, the fact is that audio you captured was super crisp, and the only way you could have gotten that, because it was a super windy day, like any other way of recording it wouldn't have worked. You would have gotten something in the background, but for it to be that crisp and stuff like that, it's like someone had to be wearing wire. I wasn't, so Odin was. So how long have you been working for him? So now that's what I was talking about, like an ally turned into an enemy type of situation. McNally basically threatening, and it's not just him, it's kind of, you know, speaking for Odin, like, oh yeah, the fact of the matter is you kind of stand against us or whatever. Basically, the people in your life and the people in their lives will kind of get caught up in this. You know, Gregson, Paige, his daughter Hannah, Marcus, Chantal, you know, as well as Kitty and her son, even obviously, and then finally Nell in a coffin is threatening Joan. So it's like either you stay out of his way or the people you care about are going to get hurt. And it's like, I don't want that. He doesn't want that. Because in his mind, it's the thing of like, oh, it's all for the greater good. Because it's like, the fact of the matter is, he's like, in McNally's mind, it's like, the fact of the matter is, of course, I would side with him because Odin is in a position, what he's trying to do could literally prevent another 9/11. So it's that thing of like, once again, so we might have to make some sacrifices, do some terrible stuff here, but it's for the greater good, you know, that type of situation. Like I said, that mentality kind of wears on him, and it, you know, it comes from a good place, but still. So Odin, he's like, oh, I'm dealing with this and this and that and this and that, and he's like, oh, I'm not too worried about Sherlock, almost making it seem like, oh, I got Sherlock figured out. It's like, no, you don't, because even McNally's like, you don't want to do this. Don't underestimate him. He's going to be more of an issue. It's like, I have more experience with him. But he's like, oh, I've got Sherlock figured out. It's like, no, Sherlock doesn't let go, especially because he's kind of all about justice and everything. So it's like stopping you from doing the terrible things you're going to do. Like, he seems like he might back down, but I don't think he is. To the point, Sherlock isn't even telling Joan the truth, which is like, oh, now this is interesting. Because I guess for him, it's like, if he's going to investigate and do anything, he needs to do it on its own. He needs to keep, you know, Joan in the dark so that, you know, it's like his movements are his own. So as long as like Joan's not, it's like if anything happens, it's like he wants it to kind of only fall on him and not her. Or you could interpret that as him being like, honestly, I am going to let it go because everyone in my life is going to be affected, in particular, you know, her in particular. So it's like, I can't let any of you guys suffer because of this. So it's hard to say 100% where Sherlock is falling on that. I'm assuming it's the former, like I said, of him just going to investigate it on his own, but it could be the latter of like, for now I have to back down, which is so interesting because he's at odds with that FBI agent who's like, oh, I'm gonna make it so that Joan's the one that takes the fall for Michael's death, and now Joan and everyone else in his life is getting threatened by McNally, you know. So it's like NSA, you can't really work with them. The FBI, it's like, it kind of screwed on all fronts, and obviously Odin's not going to give up because he wants you to eventually join his side. He's trying to push Sherlock into a corner where it's like, you kind of have no choice but to work with me. Oh, we'll do such wonders. It's a thing of like, a phrase I'm often quite saying just because I like the phrasing. Like, you know, hell is paved, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, what I meant to say. Nevertheless, it's that kind of, it fits Odin's situation very nicely. So I am very interested to see where this story ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.